I was sitting there, trying to keep calm, but Steven's words hit me like a punch. How can you go on a business trip abroad when you don't even have a job? Aren't you ashamed of yourself, coming up with a bare-faced lie like that? His voice was sharp, accusing. I tried to stay composed. It's not a lie, Steven. I really am going overseas for work. That's when he snapped. Right, then we're divorcing. I'm done with your lies. He stormed out of the room, leaving me stunned. To him, my work-from-home job might as well be nothing. In his eyes, I was unemployed and lazy. It didn't matter to him that I had a steady income or that I contributed to our living expenses. He just refused to see the value in what I did. A few days after I returned from that business trip, I found divorce papers sitting on my desk, already signed by Steven. It was clear now. If he couldn't understand my life, my work, or my dreams, what was the point of staying together? So, I picked up a pen, signed the papers, and took them straight to the state court. My name is Catherine Jason, and I'm 28 years old. My husband, or soon-to-be ex-husband, is Steven, a 29-year-old man I met in college. We started dating back then, and when I turned 24, we got married. We were always more like best friends than lovers, able to speak our minds openly. But sometimes, being too honest can lead you down an unexpected path. For me, that turning point came when I opened up to Steven about my dream. I had always dreamed of starting an online store importing foreign goods. This idea sparked during my part-time job at a boutique while I was still a student. I had always been drawn to foreign designs, and that job only deepened my passion for them. I wanted to turn that passion into a business. After graduating from college, I became a full-time employee at the same boutique, but I couldn't let go of my dream. I wanted to have my own shop, filled with products from all over the world. I wanted to share these items with customers who appreciated them as much as I did. My family and friends were supportive. They'd tell me things like, "Good luck, Catherine," or "I know you'll succeed." I thought Steven would be just as supportive. He had to understand how important this was to me, right? One evening, when he got home from work, I tried to bring it up again, cautiously testing the waters. "Hey, Steven, you know how I've been talking about opening my own shop for a while, right?" "Well, I was thinking about," before I could finish, he cut me off. "Oh, not this again. It's not going to work, Catherine. You should just quit. Life isn't as simple as you think it is. It's not going to work if you do it on a whim." His tone was dismissive, harsh. I was taken aback. "Why would you say that?" "It's not a whim. It's something I've been thinking about for years." "Impossible is impossible," he said coldly. "Life isn't as sweet as you think." I felt anger rising in me. Why was he being so negative? Why did he always shoot down my ideas without even giving them a chance? Why do you always negate everything from the start? I asked, my voice louder than I intended. Steven gave me a scornful look, his eyes filled with disdain. "Tell me, what's your plan if this little venture of yours doesn't take off? What happens when it fails?" I don't expect it to be successful right away, but I'll make it work," I stammered, my confidence faltering under his cold gaze. "And what about your income in the meantime?" he continued. "The rent, the living expenses. We split those now, but are you telling me I'll have to cover everything while you play around with this hobby of yours?" "No, that's not what I'm saying at all," I protested. "I have savings. I can cover the initial costs, and I'll still pay my share of the rent." He scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "Oh, really? Then do as you please. But if it doesn't work out, don't come crying to me. It's not my problem." His words hung in the air, heavy and bitter. I realized at that moment that Steven didn't believe in me. He didn't believe in my dreams, my abilities, or even in us anymore. Every time I brought up the idea of becoming independent, Steven would get irritated. The reason was always the same. My income would become unstable. The shop I worked at was well established, attracting a large number of customers. Because of this, my income was steady and relatively high, nearly the same as Steven's, who worked in an office. In fact, sometimes I made even more. That's why I often paid for our meals when we went out and chipped in a bit extra for the rent. But the thought of my income decreasing was something Steven simply couldn't accept. At first, he'd say things like, "Why rush?" or "Take your time and prepare," in a soft, kind voice. But as time passed, he became more blunt, less concerned about hurting my feelings. He didn't hold back when it came to breaking my spirit. Despite his opposition, I didn't give up. My dream of owning my shop was too important to let go. I knew what I wanted, and no matter how much Steven disapproved, I kept moving forward. By the time I turned 26, I had finally done it. I launched my online boutique. As Steven had predicted, it was hard in the beginning. Getting things to run smoothly took time, effort, and a lot of patience. But I refused to quit. I tried everything I could think of: outsourcing to established e-commerce companies, promoting my shop on social media, and constantly adjusting my strategies. After a year of pushing through the challenges, I finally achieved a steady income. From there, I expanded my product offerings and grew my customer base. Today, the business brings in around $300,000 a year. But I never mentioned this to Steven. I figured he wouldn't be interested anyway, and of course, he never asked. Even though he didn't care about the success of my business, he never missed a chance to remind me about the rent and living expenses. Every month, I handed over the money he demanded, no arguments. I avoided discussing anything work-related that might stir up conflict. I thought this arrangement would keep the peace. Then one day, something unexpected happened. I received a direct message on my shop's social media account. The message read, "I'm a regular customer of your shop. I was wondering, in addition to the international knickknacks, could you also sell furniture?" This wasn't the first time I'd been asked about adding furniture to my shop. It was a request that had come up quite a few times. But selling furniture was different. Unlike smaller items, furniture is more expensive and complicated. Factors like the material and quality are critical, and they're harder to verify when sourcing products from abroad. Even though I had worked in an import shop before, I knew the risks involved. I didn't want to dive into selling furniture without being fully prepared. So, I decided to reach out to my old boss at the import shop, Sarah. She had a lot of experience sourcing goods from overseas, and I trusted her judgment. I called the shop, hoping she'd have some advice for me. "Hello? Is this the manager? I've got something I'd like to discuss with you," I said nervously. As soon as Sarah realized it was me, her voice lit up. "Catherine, it's been too long. What can I help you with?" I explained the situation to her. "Well, I've been getting requests to sell furniture in my online shop, but I'm not sure where to start." "Furniture, huh? That's a tough one," Sarah said, thinking it over. "But I can see why people would ask for it. You could really expand your shop that way." "That's what I was thinking," I agreed. "But I want to check out the furniture in person before committing to selling it. How did you manage to source your products?" Sarah didn't hesitate to offer her help. "I've still got connections with suppliers overseas. I can reach out to one of them and see if they'd be willing to supply furniture for your shop." I felt a wave of relief. Sarah's contacts were trustworthy, and knowing I had her support made the decision easier. True to her word, she got in touch with one of her old suppliers, and they were happy to work with me. They agreed to provide the furniture I needed to get started. That's when I knew I had to take a trip abroad to see the furniture firsthand. It was an important step for the business, and I was excited about the possibilities. But there was no way I could go overseas without telling Steven. I couldn't just pack up and leave without an explanation. So that evening, I decided to bring it up with him. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but it was something I had to do. "Steven, about the week after next, would it be okay if I'm away for about a week?" I asked cautiously, trying to gauge his reaction. "A week? Why so long?" His tone immediately turned suspicious. "Well, I might have to go abroad for work, with Sarah, from the shop I used to work at." "Abroad? Are you serious?" He looked at me, his face twisted in disbelief. "If you're going to lie, at least make it believable." I blinked, caught off guard. "What?" He pointed at me, his expression dripping with mockery. "You, going overseas for work? You're practically unemployed. What are you even talking about?" "Wait a minute, Steven." I try to keep my voice steady. "You know I run an online shop. This trip is for sourcing new items for the shop. It's a business trip." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Oh, so now I'm supposed to believe that? You think throwing the word work in there makes your little amateur shop legit? You're delusional. There's only so far this nonsense can go." Think what you want, I replied, my frustration bubbling to the surface. But our sales are doing well, and our customer base is growing. This trip was actually requested by a customer. His eyes narrowed, and he dismissed me with a wave. Whatever. I don't care. You're not leaving for a whole week. Not happening. You barely leave the house as it is. With that, he grabbed a beer and stomped off to the bathroom, leaving me standing there, deflated. A deep sigh escaped my lips, and I slumped into a chair. Why can't he understand? His reaction was always so harsh, just because he didn't approve of my work. But I knew I couldn't just go abroad without his approval. I needed to convince him, somehow. Even though I dreaded continuing the conversation, I couldn't just ignore it. The next evening, when Stephen came home from work, I tried again. Stephen, about yesterday's discussion? I'm tired. He cut me off before I could finish. I don't have the energy for your lies. They're not lies. I'm only telling you the truth. He glared at me, full of disdain. An unemployed person going on a business trip? You're getting good at making up stories, I'll give you that. I'm not lying, I insisted. I really do have to go abroad for work. At that moment, I grabbed his arm, trying to plead with him. But he looked down at me as if I were nothing more than a joke. Oh, really? He sneered. Then let me tell you this. Liars get divorced. I froze. Divorced? What are you talking about? You heard me, he snapped. I can't stand liars. Especially people like you. Always trying to act successful when you're really just a nobody. I was stunned, struggling to find the right words. I didn't mean. Shut up, he shouted. You just want to make up some lame excuse to go on a vacation. Let me guess, your boss is a man, too, right? Fine. Divorce it is. And trust me, I'll be demanding property division. Without waiting for my response, he stormed out of the room. I stood there, my hands trembling, fury building up inside me. Who does he think he is? Just because I work from home, he looks down on me. He wants to feel superior, like he's better than me. Enough is enough. If that's what he wants, then I'll do as I please. From that moment on, I stopped asking for his permission. I decided that I was going on my business trip abroad, no matter what. 2 weeks later, as planned, I flew overseas with Sarah. We went directly to our suppliers in the UK, where we inspected the furniture and accessories I would be selling in my boutique. The trip was productive, and I felt proud of the work I was doing. On the last day, Sarah and I took advantage of being abroad and spent some time sightseeing. It was refreshing to have a few fulfilling days away from everything, but of course, it wasn't entirely stress-free. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Stephen, each one more infuriating than the last. You didn't really go overseas, did you? Get back here right now. I'll forgive you if you return today. Time's up. We're getting divorced. You're worthless. His words, his accusations, they filled me with irritation, but I refused to reply. I had nothing more to say to him. I was done letting him control me with his anger and insults. I knew that responding to Stephen's messages would only make things worse. I decided to leave it alone and hoped that when I returned, we could talk things through. If he was willing, of course. With that decision settled in my mind, I spent the rest of my week abroad, enjoying a bit of freedom. The business trip was productive, and when it was over, I said goodbye to Sarah at the airport and began my journey back home. Walking through the door, I immediately felt the tension. The lights were off, and there was no welcome back. The house was silent, cold even. I headed into the living room, and the sight before me was like something out of a bad dream. Laundry was scattered across the floor. Dishes and empty containers of instant noodles were piled up in the sink. It was a mess, a complete disaster. As I took in the chaos, my eyes landed on something on the desk, a piece of paper. Curious, I walked over and picked it up. It was a divorce paper already filled out. Next to it was a note scrawled in Stephen's angry handwriting. To the cheating, jobless woman, I'm ending things with you. You don't even listen. Fill out the divorce papers immediately. If you want forgiveness, come to my parents' house. Then I'll reconsider. Just reading those words made me picture Stephen's smug, self-satisfied expression. He probably thought this note would make me rush to apologize, that I'd beg him to forgive me. But he couldn't have been more wrong. I had no intention of doing anything of the sort. Instead, I calmly signed the divorce papers and headed straight to the state court. The process went smoothly, and with that, our marriage was officially over. Next, I went to the real estate agent to cancel the lease on our apartment. The place we were living in was actually the same apartment I had lived in when I was single. Stephen had moved in after we got married because it was spacious enough for the two of us. We had even talked about moving to a bigger place once we had kids, but there was no point in thinking about that now. Once the lease was canceled, I immediately started packing. I wasn't going to waste any time. The next day, I sent all my belongings to my parents' house and arranged for Stephen's things to be delivered to his parents' home. During this time, Stephen continued to bombard me with ridiculous messages. "Stop being stubborn and come apologize now. You have until the end of the week." I ignored every single one. I had no desire to engage with him anymore. Once I finished clearing out the apartment, I left and returned to my parents' home. A week later, my phone started ringing early in the morning. At first, I ignored it, hoping it would stop, but the calls kept coming. Reluctantly, I decided to pick up. I knew this would be the last conversation I had with Stephen, and I was ready to put an end to it. I answered the call. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Stephen didn't waste any time. He started yelling at me, his voice so loud I instinctively pulled the phone away from my ear. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Taken aback by his tone, I stayed calm. I quickly decided to record the conversation, just in case. "What's the big deal? There's nothing left for us to talk about. Don't mess with me. Why were all my things delivered to my parents' house? I just got to the apartment, and it's completely empty." "Oh, that," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I canceled the lease, so I had to move everything out." "Canceled the lease?" he shouted, his anger palpable through the phone. "How dare you do something like that on your own?" I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me as I responded. "On my own? The apartment was in my name, Stephen. I can do whatever I want with it, can't I?" By this point, I had nothing left to lose, and his words no longer had any power over me. I spoke with a provocative tone, not caring if it annoyed him. Stephen, clearly frustrated, snapped back, "Don't mess around, Catherine. I don't give a damn about the lease." But it didn't matter to me anymore. I was free, finally free from him and the toxic weight he had brought into my life. His anger, his insults, none of it affected me. I had moved on. We were married, remember? I lived in that apartment too, and you just canceled it without talking to me first. Stephen's voice was rising, full of anger. "Married, huh?" I said, trying to stay calm. "Well, guess what? Whether you think I cheated or not, we're not married anymore. You left those divorce papers for me to sign, and I submitted them. So, technically, we're strangers now. Why would I keep paying rent for a place when we're not together anymore?" There was silence on the other end of the line before he sputtered. "Wait, what are you talking about? You're joking, right? You're practically unemployed. You'd be in trouble without me." I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Trouble without you? When did I ever say that, Stephen?" He was clearly caught off guard and struggled to respond. I took the chance to finally let out everything I had been holding in. "You've looked down on me this entire time, treated me like I was some jobless nobody. But I'm not. I didn't cheat on you. I went abroad for work, for my clients. But you never cared to understand that, did you?" His tone shifted slightly, but he still wasn't getting it. "Wait, hold on, but your online store, it's not like the sales can just..." I cut him off. "I've been working my butt off for 3 years, Stephen. 3 years. You don't know anything about what I do, because you never bothered to ask. You've just been making assumptions, looking down on me." "3 years," he muttered, almost to himself. "Yeah," I continued, feeling the weight lift as I finally spoke my mind. "In case you didn't know, I've been making way more than you ever have. And you know what? I'm done with the marriage where I'm constantly belittled. You can go ahead and live your miserable life on your own. I'm not looking back." With that, I hung up the phone. It felt final, and I wasn't sad about it. I deleted his number, cut off any way for him to contact me, and decided that this chapter of my life was well and truly over. Apparently, Steven eventually came to realize the truth. He heard about my success through mutual friends, about how well my online store was doing and how many people were using it. One day, he even had the nerve to come by my parents' house, but my dad turned him away at the door. There was nothing left to say. Word eventually got back to me that Steven's own parents had found out about how he'd treated me, and they kicked him out. Now, he's renting a small apartment near his office and just shuffling between work and home alone. As for me, I decided to stay with my parents for a while. It felt right, like a reset I needed. One of the best things about running my own business is that I can work from anywhere, and being at home gave me a sense of stability. My parents' house is old, and I've been thinking about renovating it soon. I can see myself working on that project while continuing to grow my business. I feel free now. Free to travel whenever I need to. Free to pursue my dreams without worrying about anyone holding me back. Sure, I have a divorce on my record, but I don't regret it. Prioritizing my dreams was the best decision I've ever made. I'm determined to keep working hard and repay the kindness of the people who stood by me through it all.